Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of AppSec 101. My name is Andrew Garrett, and I work in product marketing here at Fortify by OpenText. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Virginia del Olmo. Virginia has been working in the enterprise software space for more than 25 years, and of those, 16 have been in the OSS SCA space, originally starting up Black Duck software in Europe, to building her own SCA company, and then later joining the Swedish startup Debricked. Virginia has worked with large global enterprise customers such as SAP, Ericsson, Cisco, Siemens, and many more, following them on their OSS adoption journey over more than a decade. And today, Virginia is responsible for the Fortify AppSec OSS GTM and Debricked Director. And Virginia, I am very happy and pleased that you've agreed to join me today on our discussion. Is there anything else you would like to add to your background?
No, I think that's it. Very well.
I'm excited to talk about starting left with you today. That has been a talking point around Debricked for the last little while. So I wanted to go ahead and start off there. You know, we often hear the phrase in application security that we need to shift left. That's been the catchphrase. But now with Debricked, Debricked has been this advocate for starting left. So can you explain the differences between those two? Maybe first, let's talk about what does it mean to shift left, and then what's the difference with actually starting left?
Of course. So I think shift left is something that has been talked about for more than 15 years. And what it has been focused on is detecting and fixing security issues and as in the code as early in the development process as possible. So we've heard a lot about that for a long time. But starting left is kind of a new paradigm that emphasizes more the idea of avoiding that these security issues find their way into the code in the first place. So, meaning that already when developers are researching for open source components that could potentially solve their need, then they will already at that phase see and be made aware of if there are any potential issues with a given open source component that could bring in risks into the code where they plan to do the code intake into. So that's a big difference.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So we're really talking about prevention, right? We're talking about sometimes here in medicine, the prevention is the best medicine, right?
Yes.
So it's a matter of being proactive, and maybe you could touch on some of those benefits. You know, when people are having this idea of starting left, what are some of the benefits they could realize?
So developers need to, develop faster, get products to market faster. They need to be super innovative. So this innovation with minimal delays, it's important then that already in the research phase that they can find the right open source based on different search criteria, based on the application they're planning to bring it into. But at the same time, they also need to be aware about compliance and security around the code. And in the old days, in quotes, 15, 16 years ago, it was heavily focused around open source risks related to license compliance. Then security became much more sexy, and then it was heavily around security of the open source component. And nowadays, it's also about the community behind a given open source project that can also present a lot of risks, because if it's very vibrant community, great, a lot of contributors, but what if there's a huge amount of contributors, but it's actually only a few of them that are active? Or what if this community is very slow in responding to security issues? So suddenly the focus of starting left and giving the benefits of that is that already at the research phase, a developer can have all this information at hand to take a well-informed decision that will then not be stopped in the code later because, oh, it needs to go through a security gate where it's stopped and need to be ripped out of the code and then go back and redevelop. So it's really about taking roadblocks away from the developer and saving them a lot of time and giving them all the right information in one place to be able to take that well-informed decision that is secure and compliant already up front. Make sense?
Yeah, that does. Yeah. Everything you're talking about, it sounds great. I love this idea of being able to make informed decisions. But for some of our listeners, they may be hearing this and thinking, well, that sounds easier said than done, right? But how can they actually do this? Do you have any tips on, how can they actually start to implement these, start left practices?
Yeah, I think there's two things to it. One is, of course, tooling, but there's also a very important thing, which is the more a cultural thing that we need to think as a development organization and security organization that we need to bridge culturally the gap between DevOps and SecOps. So because else this fast innovation cannot take place. We need to make innovation and security go hand in hand together. And of course, the tooling side of it and the automation side of it is by, again, giving the developers the right and contextualized insight into these open source components at hand so that they can take these decisions already when they are thinking about how they want to solve a given business need by using open source. And of course, we have Debricked Open Source Select Enterprise that offers a very complete open source insight tool that takes already the policies of the given project into account so that a developer already will know, hey, I can search based on a lot of search criteria, find some nice components that I think are nice and that can fulfill my business need that I'm trying to solve. But are they actually going to be accepted by the company policies? And those policies, again, being security, being license compliance, and also the open source health of the given community that is behind the open source project that I want to engage with. Make sense?
Yeah, that's great. I like this idea. It sounds like you're advocating for DevSecOps, right?
Yes,
This is a
exactly.
term that we've heard a lot lately. This idea of not leaving security out, because DevOps, it moves fast, and we hear so often about the speed of DevOps and the application releases and how they get faster every year. It does move at a fast pace, and that's why this idea of integrating security into DevOps, and sometimes you hear DevSecOps, sometimes you hear developer-driven AppSec. That's another term that we hear, but at the end of the day, it's all about enabling your developers to make informed decisions, like you said.
Exactly. Yeah. And also making sure that they don't get stopped by a lot of, in the old days, security gates, right? Because it doesn't motivate a developer to bring in a piece of code and then later on need to rip it out and redo it again, right? They want to do it one time, the first time, and be able to innovate all the time with new stuff and be focused about building those different functionality, those cool features and function, and not something that is already existing out there as open source. They just want to grab that and use it like everybody else.
Exactly, and you can save money, but when you have that
A
mindset
lot.
as well. If you're having to fix things later on in the development life cycle, that's just more costly. When you're delaying these security risks, and when you're finding these vulnerabilities later in the life cycle, like you said, you're having to stop everything. You're having to, in some cases, rip code out, go back to the drawing board, and that's just more costly. Not to mention it slows everything down.
And also, if I can add, Andrew, here is that one thing is that it can save a lot of cost once it's being detected, but it can also save a huge amount of cost by starting left, because studies today have shown that the average developer typically spends between 30 minutes and 1 hour per week just to find the right insights and information about open source projects that they want to take into account. And if that amount can be saved from 1 hour to 30 minutes a week, it might not sound like a lot, but if you are large enterprise organizations with thousands of developers, it really accumulates to a lot of hours that a company can save. And it's hours that these developers again can spend on more valuable thing than finding an open source component out there.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like what you're saying is that Debricked is really taking the heavy lifting out of this.
Yes.
Debricked is making it easier for these developers to identify what are the open source components that are safe for me to use.
Yes, and important, not only safe to use, but contextualized to where I'm going to use this component, because you can search for open source projects, you can see vulnerability data, you can see the license, whether it's a permissive or restrictive license. You can see, is it a big community, is it popular or not? But all that deeper insight we provide is one thing, but most importantly also is it needs to be contextualized to where I want to use it, which application am I planning to bring in this specific open source component into, because it makes a big difference if I'm bringing it into an app that I'm planning to use for internal use, or I'm planning to use it as an online banking application. The difference is huge, and that context needs to be taken into account as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, Virginia, I was wondering if you could give us some recommendations on solutions to help people start left. Obviously, you've already given us a couple of recommendations with Debrick's solutions. But for those that are having a hard time maybe getting this idea implemented at their organization, do you have any advice you could give to them?
Uh, Maybe two things. One is this cultural aspect of taking roadblocks away from the developer to help them keep up with this constant innovation, and especially what we've seen in just the last 12 months with ChatGPT and AI all over the place. Help the developers by taking roadblocks away from them. That's a cultural thing, apart from a tooling thing. And the other thing is that whether you as a development team is, very innovative and have been doing this open source managing and contributions to big project for a long time, or you're at the early stages where you're just starting to figure it out, depending on where you are on that open source adoption journey, there's a lot of things to be implemented. So a lot of companies are still starting out. So just make a plan, have a vision of where you want to be on a short midterm, and just take those steps up the open source adoption ladder one by one by one. But there's improvements to be done, even if you're at the lowest step or you're a big contributor to big open source projects. There's still more things that we can do. So just keep on going up that adoption ladder. That would be my recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, Virginia, we're almost out of time here. We have a couple minutes left. I did want to leave you with a chance to share any final thoughts you have for our viewers as we wrap up our discussion around starting left.
Again, it comes down to, I like this word of facilitating the developer, put them in the center. They are the ones with the code in their hands. They're pretty smart. Take away all the boring stuff away from them. Don't overthrow them with policies and things they cannot do. Let them do what they do the greatest, and that is innovate. And I think we should focus a lot on that.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, developers are smart people. Let's enable them to work their best, right?
Exactly.
That's great. Well, Virginia, I really enjoyed our conversation today. And I hope our
Likewise.
viewers, yeah, I hope our viewers have learned some new important insights around open source security today and around starting left. And for our viewers that maybe have not subscribed to Fortify Unplugged, I encourage you to do so. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below so we can get back to you on that. And we'll see you next time on another episode of AppSec 101. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.